Perfect. And finally, Jason Queener.
Hey, good afternoon, Lindsay.
Awesome. All right. So thank you all again for joining today's webinar, an in-depth look at all things Stir Shaken, where we'll be covering everything you should know about the FTC's latest Stir Shaken mandate. So I'm excited to be joined by a great lineup of panelists today. But before we begin, I'd like to go over a few quick housekeeping items. To the right of your screen, you'll see a questions panel. So if questions arrive as we're going through the presentation, please feel free to enter them in the Q&A panel, and our panelists will try and answer them throughout the presentation, or we'll have some time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. If we run out of time and don't have a chance to get to your question, we will be sure to circle back with you after the event. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out an email with both the recording and presentation after the event in case you have any colleagues that you'd like to share the content with. So with that, Jason, I think I'll kick it over to you to get us started today.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hey, just to echo Lindsay's comments, thank you everybody for joining, and I'm pleased to have a couple folks join me today. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jason Queener. I'm the leader of our business consulting team here at LiveVox, and I'm joined by a couple folks. Michele, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, happy to. I'm Michele Shuster. I'm a founding partner at McMurray and Shuster. I'm also a former consumer protection chief from the Ohio Attorney General's office, and so spent a lot of time helping to draft do not call regulations. And then when we got done with that, I went into private practice, and I've been assisting clients with complying with telemarketing regulations on a state and federal level ever since. I'm also general counsel for PACE, the Professional Association for Customer Engagement, which is the only nonprofit association that exclusively represents contact centers. So in that role, I get to spend a lot of time with the FCC and the FTC, and have been hearing an awful lot about Stir Shaken for years now, and it's interesting to see seeing it coming to fruition.
Well, I can't thank you enough for kind of sharing some of your expertise with us today. We're also joined by a peer of mine. Ray, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure, Jason. I'm a product director here at LiveVox. I also wanted to kind of thank Michele up front as well. She brings a wealth of experience, as she mentioned, contact center regulation, compliance, consumer protection. Of course, you, Jason, I'm glad to be on this panel with you with your kind of vast knowledge of contact center operations. Kind of echoing a little bit of what Michele said, it's here at LiveVox, we've been engaged with this Stir Shaken initiative for over 3 years, and it's been a very fluid topic. It's really touched on all aspects of the telecom ecosystem. It's not just a technology. Federal, state agencies, telco governing bodies, telcos, cable providers, analytics companies, device manufacturers. It's a really broad and wide-stretching initiative. So hopefully, we can take that 3 years of engagement and compartmentalize it for you in this one next hour.
That's the goal, right? So with that, I think again, thanks both for joining us, and let's get into it here. So I'll do a quick overview. To most of you probably already know this. The FCC's June 30th, 2021 deadline is rapidly approaching. I know that 2020 felt like it's going on for about 36 months here, but we're 6 months out from this deadline. So there's a lot of questions that still remain about what it is and how it's supposed to work. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, and we're going to help you to understand how Stir Shaken will impact your operations today. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how you can prepare yourself and be ready well ahead of the deadline to implement in June. And last and always, most certainly not least, we're always here to help. We have the experts in the subject in the space to help you navigate this tough topic. So we'll do as best we can to do that for you today and going forward. So with that, let's hop to the next slide and get into it. So I'll handle a couple of these real quick here. So a few facts. The FTC publishes a do not call list, and they started this, and as of October 2020, there were 2.8 million complaints. Imposters of those complaints were the topic of the robocall consumer reported with the most. more than 420,000 complaints received. And I think everyone knows this, but there are literally hundreds of tools out there that consumers can use to flag a number as spam. And it really takes one person to decide that your phone call is a nuisance to them, or political, or a collection agency, or a spam. So, I mean, we've seen them all out there. There are hundreds and hundreds of apps. There are processes provided by the telco carriers. So there's a lot of challenges up there that we're facing. And I'm going to ask Michele to talk about the Trace Act, because I'm in no way qualified to handle this topic. Michele, can you talk a little bit about the Trace Act for us? Michele, we can't hear you. Did we lose your audio?
No, you sure didn't. I muted myself to make sure I didn't interrupt you. It's a total rookie move. I apologize for that. So the Trace Act was passed by Congress at the end of 2019 and then signed into legislation by the president at the beginning of 2020. It was the first time that we had a definition for robocall, which is basically anything that violates the TCPA. It provided criminal penalties for violation of certain regulations. It gave the FCC criminal investigative authority. But also, and important to today's conversation, is that it required that Shake and Stir be implemented by voice service providers by June 30th of 2021. So we're about, like 7 months out now from a requirement that Stir Shake can be fully implemented. Obviously, this is a game changer for anybody that's functioning within, as Ray said, the ecosystem of the telecom world. It will require that you have technology in place to meet those requirements, and that's what we're going to be talking about here for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for kind of covering that piece. That's definitely out of my area of expertise. So let's go into, Michele, I'm going to ask you now, can you just kind of spend a couple minutes telling us what Stir Shake is and how it works?
Sure, absolutely. So, at its heart, Stir Shaken is a call authentication system. So in order for calls to be able to get through the Stir Shaken process, they will have to be attested to by their carriers at call origination. So tokens will be issued by carriers, and we're going to go into that in some detail. And then on the other side, the terminating carrier is going to have to be able to pick up that attestation level and accept that. Now, what does that attestation do? So the purpose of it is to assign a level of confidence in the fact that we know who's placing a telephone call, and that the caller ID that they're using, they have the right to use that caller ID. And so for a call that's originating and has the ability to establish those two things, an A attestation level will be assigned to that call. If the carrier that is originating that call and issuing the certificate, the attestation level, is confident that they know who's placing the call, but they don't know that they have the right, that call originator, they don't know if they have the right to use the caller ID that's being used, then a B attestation level would be assigned to that. And then we have C, or a gateway attestation, which means that they don't know who's calling or if they have the right to use that caller ID. So important for Stir Shaken, because the framework of Stir Shaken is intended to give a level of confidence for calls. It will be really critical that as you are placing telephone calls, as you're working on your attestation level, that you're able to work with your carrier to get that full attestation, that full A-level attestation. I'm sure a lot of you on this phone, on this webinar, have been attending SIPNOC, and there's been some interesting discussions during SIPNOC, and we'll get into some of the details of that. But it's important to know that as we're talking about Stir Shaken, it's really only one level of this entire system, and we'll be talking a little bit about this additionally, but there is a a set of analytics companies that also look at calls to determine if they should get through. So in essence, whether the call should be blocked or labeled. And the discussion that is being had is if a call has a level attestation, whether that ensures that that call will always get through that blocking. So this is an interesting topic that we'll be talking about here.
Yeah, I think that, I've been in attendance at SIPNOC as well. And I hope that there are attendees here who've been able to get in on that information as well. A lot of great info there. I just wanted to kind of add that as a service provider, A and B to me kind of represent a direct relationship between the calling party and the caller ID in that service provider, and C is an indirect relationship. Assigning attestation levels and standards require vetting of customers and those caller IDs. There's this acronym, and this presentation could be filled with acronyms, but this Know Your Customer message is where you legitimize that relationship between the calling party and the caller ID they're using. So as a service provider, we recognize the association of obviously our customers and the phone numbers they're using, because we either provision them for them, or they've REST-borged or LOA'd them to us, or they've been authorized by their clients to use those caller IDs to make those outbound calls. So there has to be consistent logic applied to the attestation level that you assign, and that really starts with knowing who your customer is.
Hey Ray, real quick here before we hop to the next slide and you kind of go through the nuts and bolts of the infrastructure. The question came up, and the question is basically, we make calls on LiveVox, but we own the phone number and the caller ID. How is that going to kind of shake out in this attestation?
Well, actually, just as of 3 weeks ago, and I was going to talk about this a little later, but there was a change in the SPC token access. Token access or having a token is basically what you need to sign calls. As Michele mentioned, is really exclusive to carriers initially, but the governance authority, the STI governance authority, has listened to feedback that we've all provided, and that players in the space have provided, and said that this is a bit exclusive, the requirements that were out there, and there are some use cases that fall outside of the, kind of a one-to-one-to-one relationship, and that is one of them. So the latest documentation, FCC documentation that has been released, I've got my handy copy here, actually touches on that a little bit. So, we feel our interpretation is that you're going to be in good shape as far as that specific scenario is concerned.
Yeah, it really came down to the interpretation of voice service provider, and whether voice service providers, because that's the term that's used in the Trace Act, could actually issue those types of certificates or be involved in that process. So I think we've gotten some good interpretation on that from the FCC.
Great, thank you.
So, this is obviously a diagram that reflects at a high level an illustration of what the STIR/SHAKEN call flow is. Essentially, the outbound service provider uses attestation services to insert an encrypted key into the identity header of the IP packet. One thing I haven't mentioned is, LiveVox is a 100% proprietary IP platform. So from a technical perspective, we have been and are in a great place to adopt and implement STIR/SHAKEN. So once the header includes the attestation level and other information that's required for the passport, it's sent out and then hits a terminating service provider who has verification services to decrypt that packet using a key verified through the certificate authority, and the packet details are then used for call treatment. So ABC attestation, the calling part, the originating party, the caller ID used, etc. All of that is used to then pass the call to the end customer. What's really kind of the goal from a end user perspective is something called RCD, or rich call data, or ECNAM, which will provide a illustration on the handset, whether it be a cell phone or even a kind of a standard phone with obviously a digital type of a readout for landlines, for example. But the goal is something like a green check mark to indicate that that call is verified. But what I want to illustrate outside of this diagram is a little bit of a timeline. This diagram really compartmentalizes the call flow, but to get from point number 1 over to point number 8, we've really been on a journey to implement StirShaken. We actually implemented what was required from a technical perspective 2 years ago, December 2018, and we're a very early adopter and completed successfully testing on the Addis New Star testbed, which was a hosted testbed for service providers to verify that they have implemented successfully. We did that in March of 2019, and then fast forward to October of last year, a little over a year ago, we completed interops with some of our peering carriers, and then most recently, just prior to March of this year, we actually completed testing and delivered that green check mark into the lab environment of one of the 3 major big wireless carriers. So this is not really just an illustration of technology, but it's a reflection of our engagement and the relationships that we established and worked through in order to be a positive contributor to the implementation of StirShaken, especially for the enterprise use case.
Thank you, Ray. I mean, there's a lot there, and I want to hop to the next slide because $1 million question. Michele, can you share with us how this is going to impact operations?
Yeah, so it's going to be really critical that as you are trying to make telephone calls, that you are certain that your calls are getting a level of attestation that they should be getting, because you are a legitimate caller and you have the right to use the caller ID numbers that you are using. So you're going to want to make sure that that you have that in place, because if you don't have the proper level of attestation, then there's a significant risk that your calls will not get through to the call recipient. And one of the aspects of StirShaken that hasn't been addressed yet, that is required by the Trace Act, is that calling parties be notified and have an avenue of redress if their calls are not being attested to in the way they should be, and if the calls are not getting through. So being provided with notification about that. That is required to be in place by the end of this year, and it is not yet. So really just so critical that you're working with a service provider that understands and is able to analyze traffic and determine what's happening with your traffic, and ensuring that your contact rates are not below where they should be.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it, right? I mean, if you don't have that attestation where you need it to be, and you cannot ensure the quality of your connect or even your attempt for that matter, you could see profound deterioration in connect rates and contact rates. So this is something that everybody needs to be actively involved with. So let's hop ahead here, and let me ask you this then, Michele. I mean, what does everyone on the phone call need to do about this? Or Ray, yeah. Sorry, probably a better question for you there, either one.
Go ahead, Ray.
Sure, thanks, Michele. Thanks, Jason. Just real quickly, the redress issue is something I brought up last year at SIPNOC with the formal CTO. I asked Dr. Eric Berger about that. So like you said, we're not a lot of headway there, but the steps here, you can see those obviously, but what I want to talk about is kind of like step 0, which might be where you are today, just gathering information, attending this webinar, getting educated. The key is to get and stay engaged as much as the resources will allow. You need to ensure that you communicate and collaborate with your contact center service provider, with your carrier or carriers. It's often common that whatever platform you have may have multiple circuits or carriers on the platform, and maybe even stay engaged with contact centers and organizations within your own vertical. Just to illustrate one kind of case of persistence, that major carrier interop that we did took 6 months to get that completed, and 5.5 months of that was paperwork, and a week was testing and another week was review of the data. So you have to stay persistent, dedicate a resource if you can to drive that initiative internally, and really you need to determine what the options are out there for you obtaining and maintaining a attestation for the calls for your organization. Really taking a back seat and assuming that your service provider or your carrier is just going to be ready on June 30th when that deadline comes next year is probably not the position you want to be in. So you need to ensure you understand your platform, its connectivity, and then leverage your relationships with those providers to keep moving forward.
Thanks, Ray. Okay, Michele, then back to you for a second here. What happens if I decide not to do anything now?
So if you decide not to do anything now and you're not working on ensuring that your calls are attested to, then it means that you will not have, as Ray mentioned, this green check mark or, Ray, I don't think I know what was finally decided. Will it be a carrier by carrier basis what the symbol is that the call recipient will see on their smartphones or VoIP systems? Is it
yeah, you're right, Michele. There's still some interpretation. I think this is one of Richard Shockey's most favorite discussions to have. Is it a green check?
Yeah. I think he came up with the acronym, right, Ray?
Right, yeah. Is it going to be different between providers? Is it going to be different between handsets? Is it going to be different between, obviously, landline phones and cell phones? So there's still some interpretation there. But I think the main thing that I think about is if you're passing a attestation, whatever that visual indicator is, whether it be like the basic check mark or green smiley face or whatever the case is, you're in the best position regardless of what that visual indicator might end up being.
Yeah. So really it's two important things with ensuring you're operating within the STIR/SHAKEN framework in a way that your calls are fully attested at an A level. It's first that you're getting an A attestation that's picked up by the carrier's analytics companies, so that your calls are not getting labeled or blocked because you have a low attestation level or no attestation level. And then, as Ray and I were talking about, it's going to be critically important as consumers become aware of whatever that is, a green smiley face, a check mark, or whatever, that means that it's a trusted caller that's getting through, that the telecom carriers know who they are and that they have a right to use that number. It's not a scam. It's not somebody calling to tell you need to go to your computer immediately because it needs work, or a IRS call, that this is a legitimate call. So far more likely that those calls will be picked up. And then, if you're on the call center side and you are not taking action to ensure that your equipment works and that your service providers are able to have you fully operational within the STIR/SHAKEN network, obviously those lower contact rates are going to lead to dissatisfaction with your clients. So really important that you get this issue behind you quickly, that you feel confident that you are working the way you need to within the STIR/SHAKEN framework.
Yeah, just real quick, I think that was a great point, Michele. You'll eventually, if you're not prepared, you'll eventually be in that difficult call or meeting, with either internal business units or your client. And you don't want to be in a position of risk or, worse, lose some business to a competitor. So, definitely can be some cost associated with the inaction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. So Michele, I'm going to kick this back to you again here. Sorry about that. So what are the best practices for these folks for implementation? I mean, we talked about the steps, but what are the best practices associated with it?
Yeah, it's just really critically important that you talk to your technology providers, your voice service providers, make sure that they are going to be STIR/SHAKEN compliant. If you are working with a PBX, making sure that your PBX is not going to strip what basically is the token, the SIP header. Are you guys hearing feedback?
Just for a second. Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's okay.
But anyway, so going back to that point that, for instance, your PBXs aren't stripping off, the SIP headers that are that token, that attestation level that travels along the telecom network. It's going to be really critical that you manage your caller IDs. And what I mean by that is to make sure that those are valid caller IDs. It's going to be important that you're managing your dialing. You do not want to over dial. You want to be careful also with your calling patterns. Anything that is a short burst of a large number of calls is going to be suspect. And so those are all things that you're going to want to make sure that you manage. It's really critically important that you keep that attestation level. Also, it's probably worth mentioning that in the Traced Act, the Traced Act put into place penalties of up to $10,000 per call if you're not meeting the caller ID and you are using a caller ID that you're not entitled to be using. So there's some pretty significant ramifications if you really aren't managing these types of things correctly.
Wow. So, I mean, there really is the hope here that we can kind of eliminate some of those bad actors out there in the space. So that's really helpful news. I wanted to hit one question here before we moved on. And there's a lot of questions, so we will get to as many as we can. But I wanted to clarify that one of the questions was, well, how will this impact my outbound SMS messaging? And I wanted to just, Michele, if you could clarify, this is related to voice activity only, correct?
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay, great.
The ETIA and the Mobile Marketing Association, they have standards that you should be referring to if you're concerned about text messaging.
Great, thank you. So Ray, coming back to you here, we just went over some really daunting tasks and kind of hurdles here. How can LiveVox help?
I mean, this slide really kind of reiterates some of the items that we've mentioned. Really very important to know that LiveVox is built from the ground up IP. We have incredible engineering resources, internal carrier resources that have really driven the implementation of that technology within our platform. We're helping, I think, in the best way possible by embracing STIR/SHAKEN as a positive contributor. The initiatives put into place are working towards reestablishing trust, and I don't think we can stress that enough, is reestablishing trust in phone calls. You're getting the calls you don't want, and you're not getting the calls that you do want. As we kind of had a little segue into SMS there. We are a multi-channel, omni-channel solutions provider, email, SMS, and chat. And of course, as Michele said, STIR/SHAKEN is applicable to voice. So we're striving to really maintain the highest levels of service for call completion, to maintain all those KPIs that Jason, that of course your team works very closely with on the business consulting side, and sharing that information with our clients. We want to, continue to provide a compliant-based platform that we're known for, but this level of compliance really moves into technical compliance, and the technical compliance is going to impact the operational compliance. So, that's why we embraced, we got on board as soon as possible. We got engaged and built it into our platform.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we have a quick summary here, and then I'm going to start tackling these questions. So just to quickly recap. So June's coming, yes, but I want to just reiterate something Ray said. We proactively monitor across our enterprise our answer rates, our call outcomes, and our blacklisted numbers for our customers, and we track those and monitor those for trending to make sure that we are doing the best we can to make sure our customers' calls are being completed and they're engaging with their customers. We are constantly replacing caller ID packages for our customers. I think we've swapped out it's got to be over 52,000 at this point, but that's an active, we actively monitor and track blacklisting by the published list out there, and we act accordingly. To Ray's point, we're registered with the FCC to provide confirmation of the call origination. Next, we're measuring critical contact center metrics, right, to identify and really minimize the impact of the blocking, right? So we do that by measuring things like live answer rates. A lot of this results in an outcome of an answer machine because the call's not going through, it's going straight to a voicemail. So we track those percentages and those rates for our customers to make sure that they're getting the best out of their outbound attempts. And lastly, we engage in stir shaking testing and completion with our partners. Ray is at the forefront of that, and it's probably a priority of his work week that he's actively engaged with carriers and partners to make sure that we're ready for this. So with that in mind, let's knock out a few questions here. Actually, we got one more. Ray, do you want to actually take the summary real quick?
Sure. Let's see. I think several of these points we've talked about. What I wanted to maybe add to this is a little bit more about the engagement with the FCC and access to a SPC token in order so as a service provider you can sign those calls. In addition to this summary here, there's still work that's going on to make sure that we're enabling you as a client or a prospect, if you're attending as a prospect, to receive the highest level of attestation. We're going to stay ahead of the implementation deadline, ensure that your calls are not negatively treated. We want to make sure that you understand, not only just this platform, but your platform, and have the information that you need to go forward and kind of investigate what you may need to do. You definitely don't want to be take a wait and see approach. And like we've said several times, we've been engaged for several years on this front.
Yeah, for sure, Ray. Thanks for covering that. So listen, folks, a lot of questions here. And Ray, I'm going to hit you with probably the biggest theme. A lot of this question came in. I'm a LiveVox customer. What do I have to do?
Yeah. So
there's the million.
Yeah, exactly. So, one of the things I want to mention, I mentioned earlier, is that, essentially from a technical perspective, you don't have to do anything. Our clients are all legitimate businesses and legitimate customers. LiveVox is not a platform that you can go to a website and put in false information and sign up and start dialing. We're a legitimate platform. We're recognized. Part of the SPC token registration actually requires you to file paperwork essentially and register with the FCC as a service provider. So there's governmental level requirements in place to vet companies that want to participate in Stir Shaken as a service provider, and we've taken those steps. We've accomplished those steps. So from a I guess an administrative perspective, we've done the legwork to ensure that we can participate. From a technical perspective, we've done the legwork to make sure that we can participate. And when I say we, of course, LiveVox as a platform, But of course, that then carries on down to you as our client. We recognize the phone numbers that you're using on the platform. Either we provision them, assign them, you've REST-boarded them to us, or your clients have authorized those to us, or to you rather, to use as your caller ID. So, at this point, we're handling the legwork for you as our client. So we want to give you that assurance that you're covered in the scenario to participate.
Yeah, I think that's a really important takeaway, and that's a question we get a lot. It's like, okay, I'm a customer. What do I have to do? Is there forms I have to fill out? Do I have to do? And it's really business as usual if your business is on LiveVox, because we're doing the heavy lifting for our customers. Now, here's an interesting question, and I'm going to send this your way, Michele, because quite frankly, I don't know the answer to this. Will there be any sort of consumer communication to let the public know, hey, that little green check mark or smiley face or whatever it means, this is a legitimate phone call hitting your phone? Is there anything like that, a campaign that's coming out?
So I'll say that FCC Chairman Pai, probably about, 6 months ago, was on several news channels talking about Stir Shaken and what it meant. I don't know that he fully went to the fact that there would be some type of icon or token on a handset. I'm assuming that the carriers will educate their customers, but I haven't heard about any consumer education campaigns. So I think that that's something that will need to happen. I know that's something that, as we close in on June 30th, I suspect the carriers will spend some time doing that. But Ray, I don't know. I haven't heard anything. It hasn't been discussed at SIPNOC. It doesn't seem like that consumer angle has really been the focus of the discussions. It's really been more about the technology and what it's going to take to function within the technology. But yeah, I mean, Jason, that's a critical component, right? Consumer education.
Yeah, I mean, it's all this is for nothing if it doesn't give the customer some sort of new confidence in the phone call.
Yeah, I think maybe. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ray.
Oh, sorry, Michele. Yeah, I was just going to say, I think maybe 2 years ago, consumer education was a topic that was discussed, but as we've kind of gotten closer to the requirements for technical implementation, the focus, especially for SIPNOC, has been more on the technical side, but definitely important.
Yeah,
Ray,
so that's only
go ahead,
though, right? The other part of that is that you've got to work within this framework for your calls to even get to the consumer, I would say. So you have to make sure that the terminating carrier is going to accept the traffic, that it's going to, it's going to be Stir Shaken attested to, it's going to get through the blocking and labeling mechanisms. And then, critical for anybody who's calling their own customers is making sure that your customers know to put your telephone number, your calling telephone number, your caller ID in their contacts, because there is also an additional element of this of blocking by default. So that consumer education piece really has to come from businesses too. So if you're a direct-to-consumer seller, caller, I would encourage you to engage in that consumer education, both about what that attestation mark will mean and that they should expect calls from your phone number and put those in the contacts.
Yeah, that's a great point. For any organization that considers their caller ID part of their brand, that should be part of their promotion, right? I mean, I think everybody on this phone call knows or did when we could travel what Delta's phone number was, and that becomes part of a branding. So if that's part of your strategy, then you're right. You should encourage your customers to save that to their phone book. Ray, I don't know the answer to this one. I'm hoping you do. How does this impact a Canadian call center calling into the United States?
Yeah, actually, Canada has its own telecom administrative groups and governing bodies. They actually have bought into Stir Shaken. So in North America, we're actually sharing the same frameworks for Stir Shaken implementation.
Probably the better question is, how does a call from the Philippines interact within Stir Shaken? And Ray, I'd love to have you have a go at that question.
So overall, that's a great question, something good to talk about. Overall, a lot of robocalls that come into the United States are from bad actors outside of the United States. So registration and registration as a service provider obviously is going to be available for legitimate businesses, and illegal businesses won't be able to pass the vetting that's required when you submit your paperwork to the FCC, like 2 rounds of different types of paperwork. So a lot of those calls come in to gateways, gateway providers that then relay those into the United States. So, you know, at best, those would have a C attestation or none. A C attestation basically means that you don't know who the calling originator is, and you don't know if they own that caller ID. So once StirShaken rolls out, my anticipation and what I've also kind of seen reflected by others in the industry is that, you know, those illegal international calls are going to be minimized, and, you know, legal call centers or BPOs that are calling into the United States are going to want to participate. So, you know, I think that there'll be an overall positive impact.
Yeah, I sure hope so, Ray. And that's a lot of the other questions here. There's a lot of questions around, and I'll handle this one. There's a lot of questions around all these applications like No More Robo and Truecaller, and will it stop those apps that block numbers? And the short answer is no. What the hope is that it clears the field, right? It clears the runway of those bad actors and encourages consumers to stop downloading these sorts of apps. I mean, if you've got a consumer that's gone out of their way to download an application that wants to trick you into thinking they're a person to block your phone call, I assure you they're probably not going to want to do business with you, regardless of the applications or the attempt of outreach. So, you know, there's always going to be that segment of your customer base that just is going to go out of their way to prevent you from calling them, and that's kind of the nature of the business, and that's certainly not new. But I certainly hope that everything we talked about today will kind of clean up the landscape to the point that the common consumer out there will stop that sort of behavior. So, Lindsay, before I hand it back to you, Michele and Ray, this was great. I mean, you gave us a lot of information. There's a lot of questions we didn't get to, Lindsay. I think that we can clean up in a follow-up. So I'm going to hand this back to you. Ray and Michele, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jason.
Yes, thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar, an in-depth look at all things StirShaken. As I mentioned at the top of the call, we will be distributing this recording as well as the presentation in case you would like to rewatch or share it with your colleagues. And be sure to be on the lookout for additional webinars and best practices regarding the FCC's StirShaken mandate. And I hope you found today's presentation useful and it helps you better understand what you can do to prepare for the new requirements ahead of the June 2021 implementation deadline. So with that, I want to say thank you again to our panelists, Ray, Michele, Jason. You are all great. And thank you all again for joining. I hope you have a great holiday season and a great rest of your day. Thank you all.
Everybody.
Bye.
Bye.